For 70 years, the European model pulled off an incredible balancing act. It managed to deliver high economic prosperity, robust social protection, and individual freedom all at the same time. That balancing act is over. Today, the foundation of the European economy is buckling under severe strain, and the system's survival is at risk. This crisis stems from the sudden collapse of three external crutches. The first was energy. For decades, Europe's industries ran on a supply of cheap Russian gas, which vanished almost overnight. The second was an export boom driven by a rapidly expanding Chinese market, which has now stalled and turned into fierce competition. And the third was security. Europe relied heavily on American military protection, freeing up domestic budgets for social spending, a guarantee no longer assured. With all three of these pillars collapsing simultaneously, Europe's economic operating system has lost its underlying support. The immediate symptom of this exposure is a massive divergence in wealth between the European Union and the United States. This chart tracks that divergence. Back in 2002, the economic gap between the EU and the US was a manageable 17. Former European Central Bank President Mario Draghi delivered the results in a 400-page diagnostic report. The document offered a precise blueprint, featuring 170 concrete proposals across 10 critical sectors, from energy to artificial intelligence. Draghi isolated the innovation gap right away. He pointed out that European research and development spending is paralyzed at 2.24% of GDP. Compare that directly to the United States, which invests a robust 3.46% into its own R&D. With this report, the excuse of ignorance vanished. Europe now has a perfectly mapped route out of its economic stagnation. But diagnosing a disease is entirely different from paying for the cure. The report calculated an exact price tag for the recovery. Europe needs an additional 750 to 800 billion euros in investment every single year. To put that in perspective, that represents 4.4 to 4.7% of the entire European Union's gross domestic product. For comparison, the historic Marshall Plan that rebuilt the continent after World War II amounted to just 1 to 2% of GDP. Draghi framed this as a choice: execute this massive financial overhaul or submit to a slow agony. The cost of survival is dizzying, but the math shows the alternative is the guaranteed collapse of Europe as a global economic power. The immediate response to the report was a masterclass in political theater. Heads of state offered unanimous applause and endorsements. The European Commission quickly drafted documents like this competitiveness compass, framing it as the official guide to reigniting economic dynamism. But if we fast forward exactly 1 year and measure the physical progress against the political rhetoric, the reality is bleak. Despite the universal praise, the entire political machinery became completely paralyzed by internal divisions over debt, spending, and regulations. The initial consensus was merely an illusion. It masked an absolute inability to make the difficult, unified sacrifices the report demanded. The final metric is devastating. 1 year later, a mere 11% of Draghi's recommendations have been fully implemented, and that 11% consists almost entirely of minor regulatory tweaks. The massive, necessary financial mechanisms were completely ignored. Europe possesses the strategy to save itself. It simply lacks the political will to implement the necessary, painful reforms. Draghi's blueprint was meant to be the birth certificate of a new, competitive Europe. Instead, inaction is turning it into an archive. The widening gap with the United States is the direct result of a continent choosing paralysis over evolution.